So what you need to be able to do is say how the approaches and perspectives in psychology are similar and different to each other. So if you look in your booklets, there is some guidance on the things which you can compare. So you can compare where these approaches and perspectives sit within the debates and the issues. So you can talk about determinism and free will, reductionism and holism, nature-nurture, individual situational, you can talk about usefulness, you can talk about ethical considerations, you can talk about socially sensitive research, you can talk about psychology as a science. So you can say one is scientific, one is not, one is nature, one is nurture as differences. So you could say that they're both deterministic, they're both reductionist as similarities. You can also talk about reliability and validity. You can also talk about some other methodological issues, so you can talk about things like the type of data often collected by that area or perspective. You can talk about the research method that's often used by that perspective. You can talk about things like ethnocentrism within that research. So is that research often ethnocentric or not ethnocentric, for example? But that's it. Okay, so what you cannot do is you cannot just compare the studies with each other, because that's not answering the question. You won't get any marks for that. Nor can you compare the assumptions. So for example, if I asked you to compare the psychodynamic perspective to the behaviourist perspective, it is not enough for you to just say that the behaviourist perspective believes that all behaviours are learned, while the psychodynamic perspective believes you behave in particular ways due to unconscious conflict. That's not enough, okay? And you wouldn't get marks for that because it's not one of the things that I've listed. But what you can do is you can use those assumptions in your mind to kind of decide where these approaches or perspectives fall within the debates. So instead of saying behaviourist is all about learning and psychodynamic is all about the unconscious, you could use that to decide where they fit on kind of maybe like the individual situational debate, for example, or the nature-nurture debate, for example. Okay, so what I've done to make things a little bit easier now, you will need to know at least a couple of similarities and a couple of differences between all of the approaches and perspectives. Now, I'm not saying that you need to sit there and revise this document and learn this document, because what you need to be able to do is essentially know each of those approaches and perspectives well enough that if you got asked about the similarities and differences, you've got the knowledge to be able to sit there and think about whether those approaches and perspectives are valid, are reliable, what research method they use, where they fit with the debates, and then have the skill to be able to put that into a comparison question. So that's why I'm not going to get you to kind of sit there and try and compare them in that way. I've provided this document for you. Now what you can do is in your booklets there is space to copy this up. So if you get in your B and C booklets up to comparison of approaches and perspectives, you'll find that this table goes across 2 pages. So this table, it's got all the approaches and perspectives across the top and also down the side. And what you'll see is that the differences are all to one side in red. So for example, this is the differences between the cognitive and the social, between the developmental and the social, and so on. And all the similarities are to the left in green. So for example, this one is the similarities between the social and the biological. Okay. So that document is already provided for you. So what I want you to do is just kind of pause the video right now, and I want you to just copy up that document. So pause the video here and do that, and then come back to this video. Now then, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to write this into answers. Now I'm going to tell you the structure that you need to use. So you need to, just like you do when you complete a similarity difference question between studies, you need to firstly provide the point. So, in other words, state similarity or difference in terms of a debate or methodological issue, such as reliability, validity, etc. You need to explain for area or perspective 1. Explain for area or perspective 2. Evidence from area or perspective 1. And evidence from area or perspective 2. Okay, now usually these questions can be asked from anywhere between 3 and 5 marks, anywhere in that range. So obviously if it's for 3 marks, like this bit may be a bit more brief than if it was for 5 marks, but essentially this is the structure that I would follow for all of these types of questions, so that it doesn't really matter whether it's worth 3 marks, 4 marks, 5 marks, you've covered all your bases. So I'll do a couple of model answers for these questions underneath. So first question, outline one difference between the behaviourist and the psychodynamic perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and outline my difference straight away, so provide my point. So one, not capitals, one difference between the behaviourist and psychodynamic perspectives is where they land in the extent to which they support psychology as a science. Okay, so there is my difference, because I'm saying one is going to be more scientific than the other. So then I need to ensure that I explain this for both of my approaches or perspectives. So I can say that the behaviourist perspective is highly scientific, as it studies observable behaviours in an objective way. For example, okay, so what I'm going to do is, rather than do explain, evidence, I'm going to do my explain evidence instead. So I've explained for the behaviourist perspective. Now I'm just going to provide an example for a study. In Cheney's research, participants were measured for levels of adherence and attitudes which are able to be observed and quantified when using a traditional inhaler or funhaler. Okay, so that is my point, my explain one and evidence one. Now I need to explain 2 and evidence 2. Now the important thing is, in similarity and difference questions, it's always important that you include a connective word such as whereas. Okay, because that shows that you're making a direct comparison between the two. You're not just describing the two separately, you're making a direct comparison between the two. So whereas the psychodynamic perspective does not offer support for the argument that psychology is a science, as it studies unfalsifiable unconscious concepts using subjective and qualitative methods. For example, so this is my evidence, the study of little hands was a in-depth case study which demonstrated that his phobia of white horses with blinkers and blackened mouths was due to an unconscious conflict, which it is not possible to directly measure. Okay, and that would be enough to get you, if this question was asked for 5 marks, let's say, that would be enough to get you those 5 marks. Okay, so we'll do a similar question, but this time we're going to look at outlining a similarity between the psychodynamic and the behaviourist perspective. So, what we can say is, for example, one similarity between the behaviourist and psychodynamic perspectives is that they are both deterministic. Okay, so they're both deterministic in their own way. So then I'm going to explain for area 1 and explain for area 2. So the behaviourist perspective is deterministic, as it suggests that all behaviour is learned, and therefore individuals do not have control over their own behaviour, as this is often a result of conditioning or other learning. For example, in Bandura's research, those children who observed a aggressive or an aggressive, I should say, an aggressive model were more likely to show aggressive behaviours than those who observed a non-aggressive model, meaning the children had no control over the transmission of this behaviour, whereas the psychodynamic perspective, or you could even put similarly because we're talking about a similarity. So similarly, the psychodynamic perspective demonstrates unconscious determinism, as it suggests that all behaviours, personality, in relationships are affected by unconscious forces. For example, Little Hans's phobia of white horses with blinkers and blackened mouths suggests that he had an unconscious conflict which affected his behaviour, and that the development of this was not in his control. So again, just something like that would get you those 5 marks. Okay, so do that so that it matches up the first answer. So that would be enough. So you may just want to pause the video here and just copy down those 2 answers. Okay, so what I would now say is if you look in your booklets, you will find that if you look for comparing the approaches and perspectives exam practice in the contents table, you will find all of these questions right here. Okay, so there's quite a lot of questions. So, like I said, if you get asked a similarity difference question or a question that says compare for between 3 and 5 marks, then it's going to want 1 similarity or 1 difference. So it's going to want 1 paragraph, just like the ones we've just written. And if this is asked for, I would say 6 to 8 marks, then it's going to want 2. Okay, so there it says describe 2 ways for 6 marks. Here it says compare for 8 marks, so I put 2 paragraphs. So if it says 2 similarities, then write 2 similarities. If it just says compare, like this one does for 8 marks, I try and give 1 similarity and 1 difference. So try and make it fairly balanced. Not all of the mark schemes require balance, but it's better just in case. And if this question is asked for more marks, so for example if it was asked for 12 marks, I would be putting 3 paragraphs, 3 points. Okay, so that might be 2 similarities, 1 difference, might be 1 similarity, 2 differences. Okay, and again if it was asked for 15, then just put another point on there. Okay, so what I would like for you to do is, as soon as you have filled in this table in your booklet, so you've copied the worksheet that's been shared with you into this table, you have written down the 2 model answers that I've just gone through with you. I want you to pick a couple of these questions, either a 5 marker, 6 marker, 8 marker or 12 marker, and have a go.